In this special video, I'm going to reveal 9 things you should never tell your children and how maintaining certain boundaries can positively impact their development and well-being. You will be surprised by the last revelation, but before we begin, I want you to pay close attention to this story, as it will be very important for you to understand the great lesson of this video. Carmen, a 40-year-old mother, had always believed that total honesty was the key to a united family. With 2 teenage children, she stood firm by her motto: no secrets, no problems. But what happens when that honesty becomes a double-edged sword? Imagine for a moment that you have an open book in front of you. Each page represents an aspect of your life. Carmen thought her children should read all of those pages, but soon she realized that some pages were better left closed. What family secret is about to change Carmen's life forever? Before we begin, if you find value in these videos, please subscribe and click the bell to stay updated. 1. The danger of oversharing, family finances. Have you ever wondered how a simple number in a bank account can alter the entire dynamic of a household? The answer might surprise you. Imagine for a moment that your bank account is like a pressure cooker. If you open it at the wrong moment, boom, everything comes flying out. That's how Carmen felt when she accidentally shared information about her financial problems with her children. Suddenly, the atmosphere at home changed. The kids started worrying about things that shouldn't be their responsibility. Child psychologist Dr. Juan Perez says, children don't have the emotional tools to process complex financial information. Oversharing can cause unnecessary anxiety. And Carmen experienced this firsthand. But how do you talk about money with kids without revealing too much? It's like preparing a soup. You need the right ingredients in the right amounts. Too much salt, or in this case, information, can ruin the dish. A study from the University of Cambridge revealed that children form their financial habits by the age of 7. Imagine that. At that age, I still thought money grew on trees. But seriously, this shows us the importance of educating our kids about finances in an appropriate way. Carmen learned that instead of sharing specific numbers, it was better to teach concepts. We live within our means instead of, we don't have money for that. We save for the future instead of, we're bankrupt. It's like giving them a map without revealing all the obstacles along the way. The famous Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget once said, the principal goal of education is to create people capable of doing new things, not simply repeating what other generations have done. Applied to finances, this means teaching our children to be smart with money, not to worry about our financial problems. Carmen decided to implement financial game nights at home. Monopoly had never been so educational. Through the game, her children learned about budgeting, saving, and investing without the emotional burden of the family's real financial struggles. But what happens when kids ask direct questions about family finances? Carmen learned to respond with questions. Why do you think it's important to know that? Or, what do you think about our financial situation? This technique, known as guided reflection, helps to understand the underlying concerns of children without revealing unnecessary information. Economist and Nobel Prize winner Richard Thaler proposes, if you want people to do something, make it easy. Applying this principle, Carmen simplified financial conversations with her children. Instead of talking about percentages and interest rates, she used simple analogies. Saving was like planting a seed. Debt was like digging a hole. Suddenly, finances didn't seem so scary. Remember, it's not about lying to our children, but protecting them from worries that aren't theirs to bear. As philosopher Khalil Gibran said, your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. Our task is to guide them, not burden them with our problems. 2. Relationship conflicts, a taboo topic for children. If you thought keeping financial secrets was complicated, get ready for the next challenge. There's a very fine line between being honest with your children and turning them into unpaid therapists. Where do you think that line is? Imagine for a moment that your home is a ship in the middle of the ocean. The parents are the captains and the children are the crew. What would happen if the captain started arguing about the direction of the ship in front of the entire crew? Chaos, of course. And that's exactly what happened in Carmen's house. One night, After a heated argument with her husband about their work schedules, Carmen made the mistake of venting to her children. "Your father is never home," she told them, seeking allies in her frustration. What she didn't realize was that she had just opened an emotional Pandora's box. Dr. John Gottman, known for his research on marital relationships, warns, when parents involve their children in their conflicts, kids feel divided and anxious. And Carmen learned this the hard way. Her children began to show signs of stress, like trouble sleeping and difficulties at school. But how can parents handle their conflicts without involving the kids? It's like juggling fire. It requires skill, practice, and above all, caution. Child psychologist Dr. Ross Campbell suggests parents need to present a united front to their children, even when they disagree. Carmen decided to implement the closed doors rule in her house. Any serious discussion with her husband would take place in private, away from the curious ears of the children. It's like having a boardroom at home but without coffee or cookies. And what happens when children inevitably sense that something is wrong? This is where strategic honesty comes into play. Carmen learned to say things like, "Mom and Dad are having a disagreement, but we are working it out." It's like giving them an executive summary without all the complicated details. Carmen also discovered the power of family happy hour. After resolving their differences in private, she and her husband would spend quality time with the kids. It's like dessert after a hard-to-digest meal. Sweet, comforting, and it brings everyone together. But what happens when children ask direct questions about marital problems? Carmen learned to respond with reflective questions. "Why do you think we're arguing?" Or, "How does that make you feel?" This technique, known as active listening, helps understand the children's concerns without revealing unnecessary details. Famous pediatrician Dr. Benjamin Spock once said, "Children are great observers, but poor interpreters." That's why it's crucial for parents to provide context and reassurance without turning their kids into confidants or referees. Carmen and her husband also implemented regular date nights, not only to strengthen their relationship, but to show their children that love and commitment require work and dedication. It's like maintaining a car. If you take care of it regularly, it's less likely to break down in the middle of the road. 3. The past that's better left behind. But even with all that maintenance, there are parts of the engine that are better left untouched. Have you ever wondered which memories from your youth could drastically change how your children see you? Imagine for a moment that your life is like a photo album. Some images are meant to be shared, others to be locked away in a drawer. Carmen learned this lesson the hard way when she decided to share a story from her youth with her teenage children. It all started on a quiet Sunday evening. The family was gathered around the table enjoying dinner when Carmen's eldest son, Alejandro, mentioned that he was having trouble deciding what career to pursue. Wanting to inspire her son, Carmen decided to share an anecdote from her college years. "When I was your age," Carmen began, "I was on the verge of dropping out of college. I even went as far as forging a signature to switch majors without my parents knowing." What Carmen hadn't anticipated was the look of shock on her children's faces. Psychologist Carl Jung once said, "The greatest impact on a child is not what their parents say, but what they do." In this case, Carmen's words had the same impact as her past actions. Suddenly, the image her children had of her as a responsible and ethical mother was shaken. Alejandro, visibly disturbed, asked, "Mum, how can you tell us to be honest when you did something like that?" The question hit Carmen like a cold bucket of water. She realized that in her attempt to be transparent, she had undermined her own moral authority. Dr. Daniel Siegel, a renowned child psychiatrist, warns, "Parents must be careful when sharing their past experiences. What may seem like a valuable lesson to us can be confusing or even harmful to our children." And Carmen certainly learned this firsthand. But how can parents talk about their past in a constructive way without revealing inappropriate details? It's like walking a tightrope. It requires balance, focus, and, most importantly, knowing where to step. Carmen learned that the key is to focus on the lessons learned, not the gritty details. Instead of sharing the whole story, she could have said something like, "There was a time in my life when I doubted my path, but I learned the importance of perseverance and honesty." Philosopher George Santayana once said, Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But perhaps in the family context, we could modify that phrase. Those who wisely share their past help their children build a better future. Carmen also discovered the power of edited stories. Just as a film director cuts scenes to preserve the essence of the movie, parents can share appropriate versions of their experiences. It's like serving a gourmet dish. It requires care in both preparation and presentation. Famed pediatrician Dr. T. Berry Brazelton used to say, "Children don't need perfect parents, they need honest and present parents." This doesn't mean sharing everything, but being authentic in our interactions with them. Carmen and her husband decided to implement family story nights. Instead of focusing on potentially problematic personal anecdotes, they shared stories about their ancestors, family traditions, and moments of collective pride. It's like building a bridge between the past and the future, without the bumps of personal mistakes along the way. 4. The dangerous comparisons. Talking about other children. Have you ever thought that a simple compliment could become a lifelong burden for your child? Imagine for a moment that words are like seeds. Some grow into beautiful flowers, while others can turn into weeds that choke growth. Carmen unknowingly was about to plant a seed that would grow unexpectedly in her son's emotional garden. It all started on a summer afternoon. Carmen was chatting with a friend while her kids played in the yard. "Look how well little Marcos plays soccer," her friend commented. Wanting to be polite, Carmen replied, "Yes, he's very good. I wish my Alejandro had that kind of talent for sports." What Carmen didn't know was that Alejandro, her 10-year-old son, was close enough to overhear the comment. The Greek philosopher Epictetus once said, "It is not things that disturb us, but our opinions about them." In this case, Carmen's opinion about Alejandro's abilities was about to deeply disturb her son. Child psychologist Dr. Jaime Ginot warned, "Comparisons are odious. They create resentment and undermine self-esteem." And Carmen experienced this firsthand. In the days that followed, she noticed that Alejandro became more withdrawn and less enthusiastic about his usual activities. But how can we motivate our children without falling into the trap of comparisons? It's like walking through a minefield. It requires attention, care, and most importantly, knowing where to step. A study from Stanford University revealed that comparisons can have a significant impact on children's academic performance. Researchers found that students who were constantly compared to their peers showed higher levels of anxiety and lower academic achievement. Carmen decided to implement a new strategy. Instead of comparing Alejandro to other children, she started comparing him to earlier versions of himself. "Do you remember when you couldn't kick the ball without falling over? Look how much you've improved," she would tell him. This technique, known as internal comparison, helps children recognize their own progress without feeling pressured by external standards. Famous psychologist Albert Bandura once said, "People who believe in their ability to produce desired results are more likely to persevere in the face of obstacles." Carmen was helping Alejandro build that belief in himself. But what happens when children inevitably compare themselves to others? This is where the growth mindset concept, developed by psychologist Carol Dweck, comes into play. Carmen learned to say things like, "Marcos has had a lot of practice in soccer. If you're interested in improving, we can spend more time practicing together." It's like giving them a ladder instead of just pointing out how high the fruit is. Italian educator Maria Montessori once said, "The child is the father of the man." Applied to comparisons, this means that how we treat our children today shapes how they will treat themselves in the future. Carmen also discovered the power of celebrating small victories. Every time Alejandro showed effort or improvement in any area, she acknowledged it. "I love how you tried hard with that pass, even though it wasn't perfect," she would tell him. "It's like watering a plant. With the right care, it will eventually bloom." But what happens when other adults make comparisons in front of our children? Carmen learned to intervene subtly. "Every child has their own talents," she would respond with a smile. This technique, known as positive redirection, helps shift the focus of the conversation without creating tension. Psychologist Howard Gardner, famous for his theory of multiple intelligences, reminds us that It's not how smart you are, but how you are smart. Carmen began applying this principle, recognizing and celebrating the various forms of intelligence and talent in her children. Before moving on to the fifth thing you should never tell your kids, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel with the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. And if you enjoy this type of content as much as I do, comment, "I love these stories." By the way, also comment on what you'd like to see in future videos. I read all your comments. Let's keep learning and improving our lives together. 5. The myth of parental perfection. Imagine for a moment that you're a juggler in a circus. You keep all the balls in the air, the audience applauds, but suddenly, bam, one ball drops to the floor. Does the show fall apart? Not necessarily. In fact, it might become the most authentic and memorable moment of the entire performance. Carmen, our dear protagonist, found herself in a similar situation. She had spent years cultivating the image of a perfect mother, always patient, always wise, always in control. She was her children's personal superhero, capable of solving any problem with a smile. But, as we know, even superheroes have their moments of weakness. One day, while preparing dinner, Carmen accidentally cut herself with a knife. It wasn't serious, but it was enough for her to let out a swear word that would make a sailor blush. Her kids, who were in the kitchen, stood there stunned. Mom cursing, Mom making mistakes. It was as if they had suddenly discovered that Superman wears his underwear on the outside of his suit. Psychologist Dr. Brad Bushman notes, children need to see that their parents are human. This helps them develop realistic expectations about themselves and others. So instead of apologizing profusely or pretending nothing had happened, Carmen decided to use the moment as a lesson. "Guys," she said, "Mom makes mistakes sometimes. And that's okay. What matters is how we respond to those mistakes." This revelation was like opening a window in a closed room. Suddenly, the fresh air of authenticity flooded the relationship between Carmen and her children. They no longer felt the pressure to be perfect because Mom wasn't perfect either. Dr. Brené Brown, researcher and author, states, "Vulnerability is not about winning or losing. It's about having the courage to show up and be seen without any guarantee of the outcome." Carmen was showing that courage, and the result was surprising. Her kids began to openly share their own mistakes and fears. Little Alejandro admitted that he sometimes felt dumb at school. Teenager Sofía confessed that she was afraid of not fitting in with her peers. These conversations, once unthinkable, became a part of the family routine. But how do you show vulnerability without losing authority? It's like dancing the tango. It requires the perfect balance between strength and flexibility. Carmen learned to say things like, "I don't have all the answers, but we can figure them out together." This seemingly simple phrase conveys humility and a willingness to learn without giving up her role as a guide. Child psychologist Dr. Haim Ginott used to say, "Children are like corks bobbing on a sea of adult emotions." If parents pretend to be perfect, children feel like corks trying to stay afloat in a raging sea of impossible expectations. Carmen also implemented what she called family growth moments. When she made a mistake, she would openly share it and discuss with her kids how she could do better next time. It's like having a feedback session at work, but with more hugs and less PowerPoint. But what happens when children question their parents' decisions? Carmen learned to respond honestly. Sometimes adults have doubts too, but we do the best we can with the information we have. This transparency, far from undermining her authority, strengthened it. Her children saw her as an authentic leader, not an infallible and unreachable figure. The famous pediatrician Dr. Benjamin Spock once said, "Trust yourself. You know more than you think." Carmen discovered that showing vulnerability didn't mean doubting herself, but rather trusting her ability to learn and grow alongside her children. 6. Family secrets. When to reveal and when to protect. Imagine for a moment that your family is like a house of cards. Each card represents a truth, a shared experience. But what happens if one of those cards threatens to bring the whole structure down? Carmen was about to face this dilemma. It all started on a Sunday afternoon, while Carmen was cleaning the attic. Among dusty boxes and forgotten memories, she found a yellowed letter. As she read it, her world shook. It turned out that her grandfather, whom everyone admired as a war hero, had actually been a deserter. Dr. Evan Imber Black, an expert on family secrets, says, "Secrets can be both protective and destructive. The key is understanding their impact on the family system." Carmen found herself walking a tightrope between truth and protection. Should she share this information with her children? On one hand, she had always preached honesty. On the other, wasn't it her duty to protect her grandfather's memory and her children's innocence? Philosopher Immanuel Kant argued that lying is always morally wrong. But does this apply to family secrets? Carmen wasn't so sure. She decided to consult her friend Sofía, a child psychologist. "Children are more resilient than we think," Sofía told her. "Often, it's our own fear that keeps us from being honest with them." Carmen remembered the words of writer Mitch Albom, "Family secrets are like an invisible cancer. They grow when no one is looking." Was she allowing this secret to grow out of control? After much reflection, Carmen decided to share the truth with her children. But how could she do it without destroying the image they had of their great-grandfather? This is where the art of communication comes in. Carmen gathered her children and began, "Do you remember all the stories I told you about your great-grandfather?" Well, it turns out there's more to that story than we knew. She explained that her grandfather, like all of us, was a complex human being. He made difficult decisions in difficult times, and despite his mistakes, he was still an important part of their family history. Her children's reaction surprised her. Instead of disappointment, they showed curiosity and empathy. "Wow, Mom," Alejandro said. "That must have been really hard for him." "Do you think he regretted it?" Dr. Dan Siegel, a child psychiatrist, points out, "When we share complex family stories with our children, we give them tools to understand the complexity of human life." Carmen discovered that revealing this secret didn't destroy her children's image of their great-grandfather, but made it richer and more nuanced. It gave them the opportunity to discuss themes like courage, fear, and forgiveness. But what about secrets that could be genuinely harmful? Carmen learned that the key is to assess the potential impact. Some secrets, such as family mental health issues or addictions, can be important to share so that children understand their own medical history. Psychologist Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists. What you accept transforms you." By accepting and sharing this family secret, Carmen transformed what could have been a shadow into an opportunity for growth. However, it is important to remember that not all secrets need to be revealed. Privacy also has its place in the family. The key lies in distinguishing between secrets that protect individual privacy and those that could affect the family's well-being. Carmen implemented what she called the impact test. Before revealing a secret, she would ask herself, "How will this affect my children? Will it provide them with valuable information or just cause unnecessary distress?" Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." Carmen understood that revealing secrets from the past could help her children live better toward the future. 7. Unexpressed expectations, a double-edged sword. Have you ever wondered how the words you never said can shape someone's destiny? Imagine for a moment that your thoughts are like invisible balloons floating above your children's heads. Each hope, each dream you have for them, even if you never say it out loud, somehow finds its way into their minds. Sounds a bit like science fiction, right? Yet, it turns out it's not that far from reality. Carmen was about to discover how her unexpressed expectations had been silently influencing her oldest son, Alejandro's decisions. It all began when Alejandro, now in his final year of high school, announced that he wanted to study art in college. Carmen was left speechless, not because she didn't support her son's decision, but because she had always envisioned him following in her footsteps into the business world. Psychologist Abraham Maslow, famous for his hierarchy of needs theory, once said, "What a man can be, he must be." But what happens when a parent's must be doesn't align with a child's wants to be? Carmen realized that, unknowingly, she had been projecting her own ambitions onto Alejandro. She had never directly told him that she wanted him to be a businessman, but her casual comments about success in business and her enthusiasm whenever Alejandro showed math skills had planted the seed of expectation. Dr. Heimginott warns, parents' expectations are like water for plants. Too little, and the child withers. Too much, and they drown. Carmen wondered if she had been flooding Alejandro with her unexpressed expectations. But how can we guide our children without drowning them in our expectations? It's like walking a tightrope. It requires balance, focus, and above all, knowing when to take a step back. Carmen decided to have an honest conversation with Alejandro. She explained that, although it had never been her intention to pressure him, she realized her unexpressed expectations might have influenced him. "Son," she said, "I want you to know that your happiness is more important to me than any career you choose." This revelation was like opening a window in a closed room. Suddenly, the fresh air of authenticity flooded the relationship between Carmen and Alejandro. The young man admitted that he had considered studying business just to please his mother, even though his true passion had always been art. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Man is condemned to be free." In the context of parenting, this could translate to, children are destined to choose their own path. Carmen understood that her role was not to dictate that path, but to illuminate it, so Alejandro could see all the options available. But how can we communicate our hopes without them becoming overwhelming expectations? Carmen learned to use what she called the mirror method. Instead of projecting her own desires, she reflected the passions and talents she saw in her children. "Alejandro, I love how you express your ideas through art. Have you thought about how you could develop that talent in the future?" Psychologist Carl Rogers, the father of person-centered therapy, believed that the individual has within himself the capacity and tendency to move toward maturity. The role of parents, then, is not to direct but to facilitate that natural growth. Carmen also implemented what she called dream conversations. Once a month, she would sit down with her children to talk about their aspirations without judging or directing. These talks became a safe space where the kids could explore their interests without feeling the weight of parental expectations. But what happens when our children's dreams scare us? Carmen learned to manage her own fears and uncertainties. When Alejandro mentioned wanting to travel the world before starting college, instead of expressing her concern, Carmen responded, "That sounds exciting. How do you think that experience could enrich your art?" The famous pediatrician Dr. Benjamin Spock once said, "Trust yourself. You know more than you think." Carmen discovered that this trust extended to trusting her children and their decisions. 8. The taboo of sibling preferences. As Carmen navigated the waters of parenting with renewed confidence, she had no idea she was about to confront the biggest taboo in parenthood. What if I told you that your words have the power to create invisible divisions between your children? Well, Carmen was about to discover this harsh truth in the most unexpected way. Imagine for a moment that a parent's love is like a cake. In theory, there should be enough for everyone, right? But what happens when unknowingly we start serving different-sized portions? This is the dilemma of parental favoritism, a theme as old as humanity itself. It all began on an apparently normal Sunday afternoon. Carmen was in the kitchen preparing dinner while her children, Alejandro and Sofía, did their homework at the table. Without thinking twice, Carmen made a comment. "Alejandro, I wish you were as organized as your sister. Look how tidy her notebooks are." The silence that followed her comment was deafening. Alejandro looked down, clearly hurt, while Sofía shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Carmen, realizing her mistake too late, tried to rectify it, but the damage was already done. A study conducted by the University of California revealed that parental favoritism, even when subtle or unintentional, can have lasting effects on self-esteem and sibling relationships. Researchers found that children who perceived favoritism towards their siblings were more likely to develop behavioral problems and difficulties in their future relationships. But how can we avoid falling into the favoritism trap when, let's be honest, it can sometimes be hard not to notice the differences between our children? It's like trying not to think of a pink elephant. The more you try, the more present it becomes. Dr. Daniel Siegel, a renowned child psychiatrist, suggests an approach called mindful parenting. Instead of denying our preferences or differences, we should acknowledge them internally and then consciously choose how to respond. It's not about being perfect, says Siegel, but about being aware and repairing when we make mistakes. Carmen decided to implement this strategy. She gathered her children and said, "Kids, I made a mistake by comparing you. Each of you is unique and valuable in your own way. I apologize if I've ever made you feel less important." This conversation opened the door to a deeper dialogue. Alejandro admitted that he sometimes felt less valued, while Sofía confessed the pressure she felt to be the organized one. Carmen realized that her comments, although well-intentioned, had been fueling these insecurities. The Greek philosopher Plato said, "You can discover more about a person in an hour of play than in a year of conversation." Inspired by this idea, Carmen implemented family game nights where each child could shine in their own strengths. Alejandro proved to be a brilliant strategist in board games, while Sofía surprised everyone with her creativity in word games. But what happens when the differences between siblings are truly notable? Dr. Jaime Ginot, a pioneer in parent-child communication, suggests, praise the effort, not the talent. Instead of saying, "You're so smart," Carmen learned to say, "I'm impressed with how hard you worked on that project." Carmen also discovered the power of one-on-one moments. She dedicated individual time to each child, tailoring activities to their particular interests. With Alejandro, she explored art museums, while with Sofía, she enjoyed afternoons in the kitchen. These moments not only strengthened their individual bonds, but also reduced the need for comparisons. Psychologist Alfred Adler, known for his birth order theory, reminds us that each child in the same family lives in a different environment. Carmen understood that her task was not to treat her children identically, but to ensure that each one felt equally loved and valued. 9. The power of wise silence. Carmen had learned to navigate the turbulent waters of parenting, but what she was about to discover would make everything she had learned before seem like a mere splash at the shore. Are you ready to dive into the depths of silence? Imagine for a moment that your words are like stones you throw into a pond. Each one creates ripples that extend beyond what you can see. But what happens if you stop throwing stones and simply observe the still water? This is the essence of wise silence, the most powerful secret Carmen discovered on her journey as a mother. The Stoic emperor Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Say nothing which is not necessary." It seems simple, doesn't it? But in a world where we are constantly bombarded with information, where we feel the pressure to always have the right answer, silence has become a lost art. Carmen realized this one afternoon while watching her children play in the garden. She was about to intervene in a dispute between them when something stopped her. "What if I just observe?" she thought. To her surprise, the children resolved their conflict without her intervention. It was as if she had discovered a hidden superpower, the power of saying nothing. Psychologist Carl Rogers, a pioneer of client-centered therapy, used to say, "The greatest gift you can give someone is your undivided attention." Carmen began to apply this principle in her home. Instead of rushing to give advice or solutions, she simply listened. And something magical began to happen. Her children started to open up more. They shared their thoughts and feelings without fear of being judged or interrupted. Carmen became their confidant, not for what she said, but for what she didn't say. But how can we implement this wise silence in our daily lives? Here's a practical guide. The 5-second rule. Before responding to anything, count to 5 in your mind. This small pause gives you time to think about whether you really need to say something. The mirror technique. Instead of giving your opinion, reflect what your child is saying. It seems you're feeling frustrated with that task. This helps them process their own emotions. The power of questions. Instead of giving answers, ask questions. What do you think you could do in that situation? This fosters critical thinking and problem solving. Shared silence moments. Dedicate time to silent activities with your children, such as drawing or simply sitting together in the garden. Shared silence can be as powerful as a deep conversation. The reflective pause. When your child tells you something important, take a moment before responding. Say something like, "That sounds important. Let me think about it for a moment." This shows that you value their words and consider them carefully. A study conducted by the University of California revealed that children whose parents practiced active listening and reflective silence showed higher levels of self-esteem and communication skills. It's as if the parents' silence created a space for their children's inner voice to flourish. Carmen noticed surprising changes in her family. Alejandro, who had previously been reserved, began to share more about his art projects. Sofía, who used to constantly seek her mother's approval, started to make decisions with more confidence. Carmen's silence had created a garden where her children could grow and flourish at their own pace. But what happens when you really need to say something? The philosopher Epictetus reminds us, we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. When Carmen did speak, her words carried more weight because they were carefully chosen and timely. Implementing wise silence doesn't mean becoming a mute statue. It's more like being a conductor. You know when to make a subtle gesture and when to let the music flow on its own. Sometimes the most eloquent silence is a knowing smile or a warm hug. Remember, the balance between honesty and protection is crucial. It's not about hiding the truth, but rather presenting it in a way that our children can process and grow from. Reflect on your own family communication. Are you creating a space where your children feel safe to express themselves? Silence communicates as well. Sometimes a knowing look or a warm hug speaks louder than 1,000 words. If you've made it this far, write in the comments, "I deserve a happy life," so I'll know who the victors are who made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more content like this in the future. Share this video with your loved ones so they can implement this wisdom starting today. And if you'd like to support the channel, consider becoming an exclusive member. I'll leave a link in the pinned comment for you to download my new ebook. Thank you for your support. Now, click on this video to keep nourishing your mind with wisdom. A big hug and see you next time.